The early summer sun glistened off the Atlantic, scattering golden shards across the cobblestones of St. Augustine. In a quaint centuries-old Victorian home overlooking the harbor, laughter and music spilled out into the balmy evening air. To the casual observer, the Hartman Vega household was the very embodiment of perfection. Neighbors whispered of their seemingly charmed life. Adrian Hartman, a dashing cybersecurity expert with a wry smile and penetrating eyes, and his wife Elena Vega, whose paintings evoked the tumult and tenderness of a soul too deep for words. Inside their spacious parlor, where antique mirrors caught the light in a cascade of shimmering reflections, Elena had arranged an intimate dinner party. The table was set with crystal and silver, and the aroma of rosemary-infused roast mingled with hints of sea salt carried in from the nearby shore. Guests mingled, their voices rising and falling like the tide outside. Yet beneath the clinking of glasses and the soft strains of a piano, an undercurrent of tension pulsed quietly, a premonition that not all was as it seemed. Elena herself moved among her friends with an effortless grace. Her eyes, dark and thoughtful, occasionally wandered toward Adrian, who at that moment was engaged in animated conversation about cybersecurity risks in the digital age. His smile was genuine enough, but something in the half-hidden look behind his eyes betrayed a secret that weighed on him like a stone in his chest. Later that night, as the festivities wound down and the last guests departed into the warm embrace of the night, Elena found herself alone in the study. The room was dark except for the lamplight that played shadows on the books lining the walls, a silent library of past glories and hidden regrets. She sat at her writing desk, absently tracing the rim of a porcelain teacup, and her thoughts turned to the strange changes she had noticed over the past few weeks. It had started with Adrian's inexplicable late-night absences. Initially, she had chalked them up to long hours at work. The demands of his high-profile job in cybersecurity were notorious, after all. But then came the little details. A phone call that cut off as soon as she entered the room, his laptop, which he suddenly guarded with a suspicious air, and that one unsettling text message she'd glimpsed on his screen, a message that read, "Midnight. Doc 12. Don't fail me again." When she had mentioned it to him over breakfast one morning, he had simply laughed it off. "A client's paranoid about hackers," he had said, planting a kiss on her forehead. Yet that kiss, meant to reassure her, felt strangely cool, as if it were a barrier rather than a bomb. In the days that followed, Elena found herself increasingly adrift in a sea of doubt. The familiar comfort of their life together, the spontaneous road trips, the soft murmur of whispered secrets shared under star-strewn skies, had begun to crumble like old plaster. Even the walls of their Victorian sanctuary, with its faded elegance and carefully preserved heirlooms, now seemed to harbor hidden fissures. One sultry afternoon, as the sunlight slanted obliquely across the worn hardwood floors, Elena sat by the bay window in the art studio she'd converted from a spare room. Here, among canvases and half-finished sketches, she sought refuge in color and form. Yet today, even the vibrant blues and reds of her latest piece failed to ignite her passion. Her brush hovered uncertainly over the canvas as her mind replayed the familiar scene. Adrian, hastily closing his laptop when she unexpectedly stepped into his home office, the furtive glance over his shoulder that spoke of concealed burdens. The studio door creaked open, and Elena's reverie was interrupted by the sound of soft footsteps. It was their neighbor, Mrs. Gallagher, who came bearing a pot of her famous mint tea. Over tea and quiet conversation about the weather and trivial neighborhood gossip, Elena's thoughts wandered back to her own suspicions. Sometimes, Mrs. Gallagher confided in a low, knowing tone, "A picture-perfect life is nothing more than a well-rehearsed stage play. Everyone has secrets, my dear, even those we love most." That night, as the coastal winds rattled the window panes and the tide whispered secrets against the shore, Elena lay awake in the dark. The rhythmic pulse of the ocean provided a steady counterpoint to her spiraling thoughts. In the half-light, her mind conjured images of a hidden world, of clandestine phone calls and mysterious meetings in abandoned places. She recalled the look in Adrian's eyes, the furtive half-smile, and the weight that seemed to press down on him when he thought she wasn't watching. Was it possible that the man she adored, the man who had painted their lives with dreams and gentle affection, was leading a double existence? Unable to rest, she rose and padded softly through the silent corridors of their home. Passing by the study, she noted that Adrian's office door was ajar, a door he always closed when he was on a work call. With a trembling hand, she pushed it open. The room was dimly lit by the glow of his computer screen. On the desk lay not only documents on cybersecurity protocols, but also a second phone, one she had never seen before. Its screen was dark now, but the mere presence of it sent a chill through her. In that moment, The carefully constructed facade of their life began to crumble. Elena's heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. She knew that what she had discovered was only the first fragment of a puzzle that promised far more than simple infidelity. There was something dangerous lurking behind the polished veneer of their lives, a secret that could shatter not only her heart, but the very foundation of their future. With trembling resolve, she tucked the burner phone beneath a cushion on the sofa and sat down. The soft hum of the computer filled the silence as she pondered her next move. She knew that confronting Adrian would unleash a torrent of emotions, and perhaps reveal truths she wasn't sure she could bear. Yet inaction was no longer an option. Every unanswered question, every furtive glance and half-whispered excuse, was a crack in the mirror that reflected their shared happiness. Before dawn had fully broken, Elena resolved that she would no longer remain a silent spectator to the disintegration of her life. Tomorrow, when the first light of day painted the horizon in soft pinks and golds, she would confront the man she loved and demand the truth. Whatever cost, whatever pain lay ahead, she was determined to reclaim her life from the shadows of deception. That fateful morning dawned over a restless sea. The horizon was a tapestry of grays and blues, as if the weather itself were mourning what was about to unfold. Elena awoke with a persistent knot of dread in her stomach. The house, usually alive with the warm glow of routine and love, felt cold and distant. In the stillness of the early hours, every sound, the creak of floorboards, the distant call of a gull, seemed amplified, as if warning her of an approaching storm. After a breakfast that tasted of ash and uncertainty, Elena found herself watching Adrian leave for work. His briefcase was clutched in his hand, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the morning. As he stepped into his car, a flash of determination crossed her face. Today, she would follow him. Today, she would begin to peel back the layers of mystery that had long cloaked his nightly absences. Dressed in dark jeans and a soft, worn leather jacket, Elena slipped quietly out the back door just as dawn broke. The coastal streets were still damp with the early mist. The city, with its historic charm and hidden corners, seemed almost complicit in her clandestine quest. She moved with a careful grace, her footsteps muffled on the stone pavement, as she trailed behind him at a distance. Adrian's route was predictable enough. He veered off the main boulevard onto a quieter road leading toward the harbor. The air was heavy with salt and the distant roar of surf against rocky outcroppings. As she followed him, Elena's mind raced. Had she been the fool to trust so completely? Or had she simply been blind to the subtle signs that now screamed at her from every corner of their shared life? Before long, Adrian's car slowed near an area that had long been a subject of local lore, the old lighthouse at the edge of the harbor. Abandoned for decades and shrouded in ghost stories, the lighthouse had become a magnet for those who wished to escape the prying eyes of the town. Its whitewashed walls, now peeling and scarred by time, stood as a silent sentinel over secrets that few dared approach. Heart-pounding, Elena parked her car in a shadowed alcove. She stepped out, her breath visible in the cool morning air, and moved slowly along the rocky path that led to the lighthouse. Every step felt as though it carried her deeper into a labyrinth of hidden truths. The structure loomed ahead, a relic of bygone eras, its narrow windows like eyes that had witnessed countless storms and tragedies. Peering through a broken pane, Elena's eyes adjusted to the dim interior. There, in a room lit only by the diffused light of an overcast sky, she saw Adrian. He stood in a tense huddle with a man whose face was obscured by a dark hood. The stranger's features were unreadable, but his body language radiated menace. In his hand, he held something small and rectangular, a USB drive, glinting with the promise of forbidden data. The hushed voices of the two men were nearly drowned out by the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. Yet Elena strained to catch fragments of their conversation. "One more job," the stranger hissed in a gravelly tone that brooked no argument. "Or they'll know about her." The word, her, cut through the ambient noise like a shard of ice. Elena's mind reeled. Was she merely a bystander in this dangerous game? Had Adrian's secrets always included a threat to her? Frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding so fiercely she feared it might burst, Elena wrestled with a torrent of emotions. Anger flared at the thought of deception, fear took root at the mention of her name in such a sinister context, and grief welled within her at the prospect of a love that had become tainted by lies. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to run back to the safety of what she once believed was a perfect life, but curiosity, that maddening, inescapable need to know, kept her rooted in place. Time seemed to stretch into an eternity as she watched the clandestine exchange. Adrian's face, usually so expressive and warm in her memory, was now etched with lines of anxiety and regret. The stranger's grip on the USB drive tightened as if it contained the weight of the world. And then, as if sensing that the fragile equilibrium of secrecy had been compromised, the man muttered something else, a name, a code word, and abruptly strode from the room. The moment the door closed behind him, Adrian turned toward the shattered window as if expecting to see Elena's reflection. For a long, excruciating moment, he stood unmoving in the half-light, his eyes dark and searching. Then, with a resigned sigh, he gathered the drive and left the room, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the cavernous interior. Inside her own heart, a storm was gathering. Elena knew that the life she had cherished was built on shifting sands, and that the coming days would force her to confront not only the man she loved, but also the very nature of the dangerous world he'd entangled them in. As she slipped away from the lighthouse, the early morning gave way to a sky that seemed heavy with portent, each cloud a silent witness to the unraveling of a dream. Back in the safety of her own home, the events of the morning played over and over in her mind. Every detail, the cold glint in Adrian's eyes, the cryptic words exchanged in the deserted lighthouse, conspired to shatter the illusions that had once made her life seem so idyllic. In that fragile, uncertain light, Elena resolved that nothing, not even the remnants of a love she once thought unassailable, could keep her in the dark forever. And so, with a heavy heart and trembling determination, she prepared herself for the inevitable confrontation. Tomorrow would bring answers, and with them, consequences that might forever change the course of her life. The new day arrived with a weight that seemed to press down on every surface of the Hartman Vega home. Elena awoke in a cold sweat, haunted by the images of that stormy night at the lighthouse, the furtive exchange, the whispered threat that mentioned her name. Even as dawn's timid light crept through the lace curtains, her mind was awash with questions too painful to ignore. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, she sat at the kitchen table, her eyes fixed on the burner phone she had hidden just hours before. Its dark screen was a silent reminder of the secret world that had invaded her once idyllic life. The sound of her own heartbeat filled the silence as she resolved that today, there would be no more secrets. Every lie, every omission had to be brought into the light. "Adrian," she said quietly, her voice more determined than trembling, "we need to talk." At the breakfast table, Adrian's gaze fell from his mug of steaming coffee as he met her eyes. There was something different about the look in his eyes now, a mix of guilt, fear, and a deep-seated sorrow that spoke of long-buried truths. For a long, agonizing moment, neither spoke. Then, as if compelled by the weight of the inevitable, Adrian sighed and gestured for her to sit. "I know," he murmured, the words heavy as lead. "I know there's so much you don't understand." Elena's fingers trembled as she pushed the burner phone into view. "I saw it, Adrian. I saw you at the lighthouse. I saw you handing over that USB drive, and then, that voice. Or they'll know about her. Who is her? And why would you hide this from me?" The quiet clatter of cutlery against porcelain punctuated the silence between them. Adrian's face, usually so expressive and comforting, now tightened in anguish. Slowly he began to speak, his voice low, almost a whisper, as if confessing a sin he could no longer keep buried. "Before we met, before we built our life together, I started a tech company. It was more than a dream at the time, a promise of a future I never thought could be tainted by darkness. But I made mistakes, Elena. Mistakes that ensnared me in a web of crime and corruption. The money, the laundering, it wasn't supposed to be my burden. I thought I could leave it behind. But when I tried to extricate myself, they made you the price. They made it clear, either I continue, or you become collateral damage." Her eyes widened in shock. Every tender memory of their whirlwind romance now twisted with the sharp sting of betrayal. "So all these years, you thought keeping me in the dark was protecting me," she cried. "Adrian, you were running from your past, and you dragged me along." His voice broke as he replied, "I thought if I controlled the narrative, if I managed the threat without letting you know the details, I could keep you safe. I believed that by keeping you uninvolved, I was sparing you from the horror of it all. I was wrong, I see that now." Before more words could be exchanged, a sudden violent crash shattered the fragile calm. The sound of splintering wood and shattered glass echoed from the hallway. Both Elena and Adrian sprang to their feet, terror now replacing the earlier despair. The front door burst open, and a group of masked intruders flooded into their home. The attack was swift, ruthless, and without mercy. One of the attackers, his voice cold and ragged, barked, "Adrian Hartman, we have orders." Hand over the work, and leave her out of this." In an instant, chaos erupted. Elena found herself pinned against a wall by a thug whose grip was as cold as the steel of the knife he brandished. Her scream, muffled by shock and fear, was drowned out by the commotion of shoving, grappling, and the clanging of objects. In that terrifying moment, the two lovers were forced to confront not only the betrayal of the past, but the lethal threat of the present. Adrian lunged forward, fueled by a desperation that left him momentarily invincible. In the struggle, he managed to activate a hidden panic button, a final desperate safeguard he had installed long ago. Within seconds, an ear-splitting alarm blared throughout the house, and red and blue lights danced across the walls. The attackers, thrown off by the sudden chaos, exchanged panicked glances before retreating into the night. Cradling a shaken and bruised Elena, Adrian whispered, "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." His eyes glistened with regret as he pressed his forehead to hers. "I've been working with the FBI. For months, I've been feeding them what I can about the cartel. I thought I could keep you safe by keeping you in the dark. I realize now that keeping you from the truth only put us both in more danger." Tears welled in Elena's eyes as the raw truth sank in. "You let me believe we were happy, perfect," she choked out. "Instead, you built our life on lies." For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound was their ragged breathing and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Slowly, as the shock ebbed away, a fragile understanding began to take shape in the midst of betrayal and pain. The danger was real, and it was only growing. In the shared silence, Elena realized that if they were to survive, they had no choice but to stand together. "We have to stop them," she said, her voice trembling yet resolute. "I won't let your secrets, or their threats, destroy us. Not now, not ever." Adrian's hand tightened around hers. "I promise, Elena. No more secrets. From this moment on, we face this together." In the wake of that brutal attack, the Hartman Vega home was transformed into a temporary war room. Maps were spread across the dining table, and discreet conversations over hushed phone calls with FBI contacts became the new norm. The walls that had once echoed with laughter now vibrated with the urgency of clandestine meetings and whispered strategies. Elena's own transformation was as profound as it was unexpected. Her pain found expression in art, furious, raw canvases depicting storm-tossed seas, shattered mirrors, and phoenixes rising from smoldering ruins. Every brushstroke was a testament to her struggle, a vivid declaration that out of betrayal and darkness, something fiercely beautiful could be born. Late one evening, as rain tapped steadily against the window panes, Elena and Adrian pored over a blueprint of the city. The FBI's intel had led them to a chilling discovery. The cartel's elusive leader, known only as the Architect, was planning a high-profile operation that would expose everything, and silence anyone who dared defy him. Even more horrifying was the revelation that he intended to use Elena's upcoming art gallery opening as a lure. Adrian's eyes were dark with worry as he explained, "The Architect intends to use the gala as a stage, a way to lure me out in the open and expose our ties to the FBI. It's not just about the money or the power, it's about sending a message. And if you're there, they'll have leverage over me, and over you." Elena's heart clenched at the thought. The gallery had always been her sanctuary, a space where she could celebrate life and the vibrancy of creativity. Now it was to become a battlefield for justice, a battleground where art would meet violence head-on. "Then we turn the tables on them," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "We'll use the gallery to our advantage. If they expect to trap us, we'll set a trap of our own. We will expose every last one of them." In the days that followed, the planning was meticulous. Under the cover of twilight, Elena coordinated with trusted friends and fellow artists, many of whom had unknowingly become pawns in a dangerous game of espionage. Adrian, working closely with Agent Carter and other FBI operatives, transformed their once private haven into a nexus of covert operations. Hidden cameras were discreetly installed among the sculptures, encrypted messages were exchanged behind the scenes, and secret escape routes were mapped out in every corner of the house. Late into the night, in a small cluttered study lit only by the glow of a desk lamp, Elena and Adrian found themselves huddled together over a spread of blueprints and intelligence reports. The seriousness in their eyes was mirrored by the silence that enveloped them, a silence pregnant with both dread and the promise of redemption. "I never imagined we'd be here," Elena whispered, her hand resting on the map of the gallery. "I used to believe that our life was perfect. Now I see it was just a fragile illusion, one that could be shattered by the smallest crack." Adrian reached out, gently brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "I was so wrong to shield you from the truth," he said, his voice thick with remorse. "Every moment I kept you in the dark was a mistake. But I vow to make it right. From now on, you're my partner in every way. We fight this together." Elena's gaze met his, fierce and unyielding. "Then let's do it. Let's show them that love isn't something that can be bought or manipulated by fear. We'll use every resource we have, every ounce of strength, and every bit of courage to end this nightmare." That promise, spoken in the dead of night among whispered plans and secret codes, became the foundation of their renewed bond. Though the scars of betrayal were still fresh, in the crucible of danger they discovered a love more profound than before. One that was tempered by hardship and emboldened by the shared determination to reclaim their lives. The night of the gallery opening arrived like the calm before a storm. The historic building, an elegant relic steeped in history, was transformed into a living canvas of light and color. Ambient music mingled with the soft murmur of voices as guests in elegant attire strolled among the carefully curated artworks. Every brushstroke on the canvases seemed to vibrate with both beauty and an unspoken defiance. Adrian stood near the entrance, his dark suit immaculate, though his eyes betrayed the ceaseless vigilance of a man haunted by secrets. Each friendly smile he mustered for passing acquaintances was edged with the knowledge that danger lurked behind every polite greeting. He scanned the crowd, his mind racing over the FBI intel that had arrived in recent hours, a chilling confirmation that the architect planned to seize this very moment to make his final move. Elena, resplendent in a deep burgundy dress that accentuated both her strength and vulnerability, moved gracefully among the guests. Every step was a silent declaration that she would not be the victim in this twisted plot. Yet beneath her composed exterior, every nerve was alight with adrenaline and resolve. The atmosphere began to shift. The soft lighting dimmed unexpectedly, murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd. Then a low, distorted voice crackled over the gallery's speakers, a voice that carried the cold promise of retribution. "Tonight, the past catches up. This is your final warning." A palpable shiver of dread coursed through the room. Behind the scenes, FBI agents, disguised among the guests, moved into position. Elena's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that the trap was closing around them. Every carefully arranged detail of the evening now carried the weight of a deadly gamble. In a secluded corridor behind the main hall, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man in a black mask and a tailored suit stepped forward, his eyes hidden but his intent unmistakable. In his gloved hand, he clutched a knife that glinted menacingly in the dim light. As he advanced, the murmur of the gathering crowd seemed to fade away, leaving only the echo of his determined footsteps. Before the assailant could strike, a hushed command from one of the undercover agents reached Elena's ears. "Stay low, don't engage." But instinct and training battled for control. In that split second, as the man lunged, Elena's survival instincts took over. She snatched a heavy bronze sculpture from a nearby display and hurled it with all her might. The impact rang out like a shot, and the masked man staggered, his grip loosening just enough for Adrian to pounce. The ensuing struggle was a blur of fists, shouts, and the clatter of falling objects. Adrian's powerful grip held the assailant down as Elena, adrenaline-fueled and resolute, scrambled to retrieve the fallen knife. "This ends now," Adrian roared, his voice slicing through the chaos. The masked attacker spat obscenities even as FBI agents swarmed in, subduing the remaining conspirators who had dared to emerge from hidden recesses. But as the melee reached its apex, a final figure, the architect himself, made his move. Calm and calculating, he attempted to melt into the pandemonium. Yet Elena's eyes caught a glint of silver, a cufflink adorned with an insignia she had been briefed to remember. "There," she shouted, pointing with a trembling but determined hand. In an orchestrated counterstrike that defied the night's darkness, a volley of non-lethal rounds rang out. The architect, caught entirely off guard, froze as FBI operatives closed in. His calculated veneer cracked, revealing the cold fury beneath. In mere moments, his escape was cut off by a wall of armed agents, their unified command echoing in the hushed gallery. "Hands up now." The trap had been sprung perfectly. In the chaos and bloodshed of that fraught night, the cartel's insidious network began to crumble. The chaos was replaced by the precision of justice. As the last of the masked men were rounded up and the architect was led away under heavy guard, the gallery's lights slowly returned to their soft glow. A collective, stunned silence fell over the guests, an unspoken acknowledgement that they had witnessed history in the making. In the aftermath, as trembling hands and tearful eyes bore testimony to the night's terror, Elena and Adrian found themselves drawn together. Their shared ordeal, the raw pain of betrayal, the terror of violence, and the fierce determination to fight back, had fused them into an unbreakable unit. Amid the wreckage of shattered illusions and scattered glass, a spark of hope kindled anew. Months later, the tempest had passed. On a secluded stretch of beach where the Atlantic's relentless tide whispered tales of renewal, Elena and Adrian stood side by side beneath a sky transformed by the gentle hues of dawn. The once turbulent horizon now shimmered with the promise of a new beginning, a canvas waiting to be painted with trust, forgiveness, and hope. In a modest ceremony attended by those who had stood with them through the darkest hours, the couple renewed their vows. The ceremony was intimate, a quiet reaffirmation of their commitment and the hard-won wisdom that true love was forged in the crucible of hardship. Adrian knelt before Elena on the warm sand, a delicate ring cradled in his calloused hand. The ring's band was inscribed with one simple word: trust. "You are my redemption," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "In your eyes, I see the strength to overcome every dark moment, and with you, I have found the courage to start anew." Elena's eyes shimmered with tears, tears of sorrow for what had been lost and joy for what had been found. "And you are mine," she replied softly, her hand sliding into his. "In our shared pain, we discovered a love that can weather any storm. We have learned that perfection isn't in the absence of flaws, but in the power to rebuild when everything is shattered." Their kiss was a promise, a sealing of vows renewed not in the innocence of ignorance, but in the hard-earned wisdom of survival. The salt of the sea mingled with their tears as they embraced, the sunrise painting the world with a delicate palette of hope and possibility. Walking hand in hand along the water's edge, Elena and Adrian left behind the ghosts of the past. Every step was a declaration that while perfection had once been an illusion, something far more profound had emerged, a love that had been tested, scarred, and ultimately reforged into an unyielding bond. The waves whispered of second chances as the couple strolled into the horizon, a living testament to the truth that even when our world is shattered by betrayal, the art of rebuilding can create a masterpiece of redemption.